afternoon. I am Heather Gerken. I'm the Dean and Solon Lillian Goldman Professor of Law at Yale Law School. Thank you for joining us for this session of the Impact Series. Today, we're going to discuss the work of one of the jewels in Yale University's crown, the Yale Law School's Justice Collaboratory, as well as the transformative work of one of our most dazzling alumni. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome two incredible Justice Collaboratory members into this group, Professor Tracey Meares and Dr. Phillip Goff. They are joined by Amanda Alexander, the founding executive director of the Detroit Justice Center. Co-founded by the law school's Tracey Meares and Tom Tyler, the Justice Collaboratory is the center of the most important criminal justice work in the country. It operates under a simple mantra: serious science, serious impact. It functions here as a mini university within the university. It includes a MacArthur Grant winner, a Pulitzer Prize winner, numerous members of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Its membership included lawyers, sociologists, doctors, psychologists, historians, even a poet. In addition, we want to spotlight one of the law school's brightest stars, Amanda Alexander, and her invaluable work as the founding executive director of the Detroit Justice Center. The DJC is a nonprofit law firm that works alongside communities to create economic opportunity, transform the justice system, and promote equitable and just cities. The firm uses a three-pronged approach to provide essential legal services, tackle economic inequities, and imagine alternatives to punitive justice through the center's Just City Lab. But before we dive into that discussion, I just want to formally introduce our guests, and I'm going to dispense with a large part of their resume because they are all stars and it would take us the entire time. So first, let's start with Professor Tracey Meares, who is the Walter Hale Hamilton Professor at Yale Law School and a founding director of its Justice Collaboratory. Before she joined our faculty, she was a professor at the University of Chicago Law School, where she served as the Max Pan Professor and Director of the Center for Studies in Criminal Justice. She was the first African-American woman to be granted tenure at both law schools. Professor Meares is a nationally recognized expert on policing in urban communities. Her research focuses on understanding how members of the public think about their relationship with legal authorities such as police, prosecutors, and judges. She has worked extensively with the federal government, having served on the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Law and Justice, a National Research Council Standing Committee, and the US DOJ Office of Justice Programs Science Advisory Board. She's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and she was named by President Obama to be a member of his task force on 21st century policing. Dr. Phillip Goff is the Carl I. Hovland Professor of African American Studies and Professor of Psychology at Yale. He is a national leader in the science of racial bias. He's pioneered work that exposes how our minds learn to associate Blackness and crime, often with deadly consequences. This research has led him to co-found the Center for Policing Equity, which is a university research center now supported by a 501c3 policing equity organization. It was created at UCLA, where he was tenured, and the center grew to be one of the world's largest research and action think tanks on race and policing. CPE also hosts the world's largest collection of police behavioral data and an NSF-funded natural justice database. This database now serves as a tool to reduce burdensome and inequitable policing through scientific analysis. Dr. Goff has won 2 American Psychological Association Early Career Awards, the Association for Psychological Science Rising Star Award, and the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives Lloyd G. Seeley Award, among many others. He regularly appears on cable news, provides congressional testimony, and he was on President Obama's task force on 21st century policing as a panelist. And finally, Amanda Alexander, the founding executive director of the Detroit Justice Center. She's a racial justice lawyer and historian who works alongside community-based movements to end mass incarceration and build thriving and inclusive cities. Originally from Michigan, she's worked at the intersection of racial justice and community development in Detroit, New York, and South Africa for more than 15 years. Previously, she worked with the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy, the Bronx Defenders, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right for Housing in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and the Center for Civil Society in South Africa. As an Ella Baker Fellow at the Center for Constitutional Rights, she assisted with litigation challenging stop and frisk policing. As a Fulbright Hays Scholar, she conducted research on land, housing, and inclusive cities in South Africa. Her writing has been published in academic journals of an extraordinary range, and she is a YLS grad, a fact about which I am extraordinarily proud. So with that, I just want to turn to these amazing panelists, and maybe I'll just sort of start out by talking a little bit about the work that you do. So Phil, I wonder if you just might start talking about your center, the work that you do, and in particular, maybe you could sort of help us frame it around a question of what role does psychology play in questions of racial justice?
So thank you for the question, Heather. It's always lovely to be with you and with these illustrious panels. I really got to say, I have rarely wanted to speak for less time so that I could hear what other people had to say, as much as I do right now. So I'll be brief. At the center, my background is as a social and cognitive psychologist. I came at these questions because I thought the ways that we were defining racism didn't explain my experiences of them. And because the definitions of racism so robustly center the experience of prejudice as central to the process, I was like, well, we must be able to sort of reinvest, or in the parlance of today, reimagine prejudice to get us there. And this was right at the time that we were looking at implicit bias as a new language for sort of the ways in which our inequalities in society map onto our brains. So we began at the center by looking at the ways in which implicit bias permeated law enforcement, permeated the folks who called for law enforcement's help, and ways that we could protect the most vulnerable against that. But what it's grown into really is a structural set of interventions. Because if we just start on the individual level, it's like putting helmets on folks who are about to get beat in the head. You really should stop the beatings first. So what we do at the Center for Policing Equity is, in addition to looking at the role of implicit and explicit bias in producing the outcomes that we don't like to see, we use the data that are available out in the world from the census, the American Community Survey, and the data that we get from our law enforcement partners to find basically ways to make law enforcement less deadly, less racist, and in as many cases as we can, just less. So the way that psychology, I think, shows up to these moments is with the authority to say, this is what's happening inside of people's minds. And I think what psychology should do with that power is to say what's happening inside of people's minds is far less important than the way that we structure our interactions. And when I say that, right, when people at CPE say that, this miraculous thing starts to happen, which is the temperature in the room goes down. We're no longer talking about people's character, and we can work backwards from a set of inequalities that we've just decided this is unreasonable and untenable, as opposed to defending our character in advance of defending the most vulnerable. So the long story shorter, if I might, we use data to try and make the systems better and remove the systems that don't need to be there. And we do that as psychologists, for those of us who are, by giving up this idea that our psychology is central to the problem and saying instead, it can't be just about your character. We have to be able to talk about structures.
So Tracey, I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the work of the Justice Collaboratory as well as your work, although I feel like they're the same thing. You know, they're so intertwined in terms of the values that your work embodies and the work, the values that the JC embodies. So if you could just talk a little bit about what you do.
Sure. And, you know, hopefully it will become evident how connected that work is with what Phil's research has been about and the amazing work that Amanda has done and is doing on the ground. I just want to say this before I start talking. You are proud that Amanda is a YLS grad. I can actually claim Amanda as my very own student. So I just want to get that in there.
That's actually much harder than being
So one of the things that we've done at the Justice Collaboratory is to think really seriously about what it means to have a just society and to have to iterate on that, you know, starting with some theories that Tom and I have worked on for a long time, theories about public legitimacy, theories of procedural justice, how people come to conclusions about the fairness of legal authorities, applying those ideas to the institutions as they exist, as Phil mentioned, to try to make them better. But over time, you know, in building the Collaboratory as a group, you know, this collection of scholars who care deeply about this question of justice, understanding the ways in which our own research has limits, can be expanded, can be changed in certain ways, but we're all centrally interested in what it means to help people who live in communities pursue their own goals and projects of having communities that are vital what we call community vitality, and importantly, the state's role in that. That every citizen deserves a set of public goods in order to thrive, and one of those goods is safety, and that the determination of that needs to be made by the people who are experiencing centrally, problems associated with violence that are too often conceptualized in terms of how individuals are hurting one another and exclude questions of how the state is actually often hurting people in the pursuit of solving that problem. I think we've all been working together and thinking about doing that. So I'll say one specific thing, and that is, this idea of procedural justice that has been central to our work has really been about how people, as I said, come to conclusions about the fairness of authorities. But even that work has this really important blind spot. I've been noticing in terms of, the inability of the researchers to account for the fact that even though how we think about fairness might be universal in some sense, what people might want for other groups that are not themselves is okay. Let me back up, because it's a little bit. So I can decide in my group that these are the basic determinants of fairness and justice. Okay. And so if those ideas are universal, then you should want those for other groups that are not you as well. But it turns out that that's not always true. And that's a central problem to solve right now as we think about how to change how the state responds to violence, how we're going to change police, and so on. And when you start thinking about really making those ideas universal, and I hope I'm not being too abstract, I think the only answer is to start where Amanda's work really starts. That's the way I think about it. And that's why I've been so motivated and moved by the work that she's done.
Well, that is a perfect segue. I was actually going to say, since Tracey's talking about vital communities, could you talk a little bit about the organization you founded and what you've been doing?
Sure. So thank you for these very generous introductions, and it's really a joy to be here and to talk with you all. So I'll back up a bit. I graduated from Yale Law School in 2013, and I moved right back home to Michigan to serve families like mine that have been divided by the prison system. And so as a new attorney, it was very clear to me that in order for Detroit to come out of the bankruptcy that was being filed that year, in order to become a city where everybody belonged, where there was equitable opportunities for people, that we had to address questions of policing and mass incarceration. So I was hearing from Detroit Public School teachers saying, it seems like half of the kids in our classroom have an incarcerated parent or caretaker. I was working with families who were deciding whether to take a collect call from a loved one in prison upstate, or keep lights on, or put groceries on the table. And yet it didn't seem that these questions of policing and incarceration were central to the conversation about the future of the city. And so, this need started to arise of the type of center that I've created, where we have a three-pronged approach. So it's important to us to centralize defense, offense, and dreaming under one roof. And the idea is that we are providing immediate legal services to people who need it. So we help people who are returning from prison, clear criminal records. We address fines, fees, tickets, suspended licenses, warrants, all these things that keep people shut out of the future of the city. We also house Michigan's first revolving bail fund. So we're getting people out who are too poor to afford cash bail. And then we go on offense. And this is where we have two economic equity attorneys who are shoring up all of the visionary solutions that Detroiters have been coming up with for decades out of necessity. So people are probably well aware that we are way ahead of the curve when it comes to things like urban agriculture. Grocery stores left, but people didn't want to leave, but they wanted to feed their families. So they taught themselves how to grow food, how to share seeds, how to build a resilient local food system. But suddenly their land was under threat because it was valuable to developers in a way that it wasn't before. And so our attorneys help people create community land trust, to help people create worker-owned businesses. So these economic solutions that help people have a stake in the future of the city. And then probably most on point for the conversation today, we have a dreaming prong, and that is our Just Cities Lab. And so for us, it's not enough to talk about what we are tearing down in terms of policing and jails and prisons, but we also really focus on what are the elements of a just city where people can thrive, and what do we need to build up. We borrow a lot. I would say one of the guides of the center is Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who talks about abolition not as the absence of things, but as a presence. So what are the things that we need to build out? And a few highlights there. So we very early on in 2018 held a youth design summit where we asked young people in the city, 13 to 18, how could we spend this $500 million that the county was looking to spend on a new jail and youth jail? How could we spend that in your community so that you would feel safe and valued and empowered? And not one of these young people said we need more jails or more police. And instead, they had a whole laundry list of ideas. One young person said, we should build a mental health spa. And we all, what is a mental health spa? That sounds incredible. And they had designed it down to what would be the most soothing paint colors on the wall. So, this would be a space where you could go and have individual therapy, group therapy, to have places of relaxation to look at the Detroit River. They said, pay our teachers, fix the water pipes in our schools so we can trust the water coming out of the water fountain, build affordable transit that will get us from one side of the city to the other. We need affordable, accessible housing. One boy said, I want it to be accessible for my mom's wheelchair. The way that they were thinking about their needs and their neighbors' needs was really incredible. And we told them, the thing is, we could build all of that and more with the amount that we're spending on policing, the $300 million that's going to policing in the city, the $500 million that's going to this jail. And so those are the types of visions that we are trying to promote and to have people share at DJC. And then it actually comes to concretely piloting some of these things. And so I'm happy to talk more about that, but that's just an overview of what we're up to.
That's wonderful. I gotta say, it's just amazing to be sitting here with the three of you, because your life's work is devoted to this, and the synergies in your work are just incredible. So I want to just build out a shared conversation. So maybe I'll start, Tracey, with you, but have a question for everyone. So can you talk a little bit about what we know about people in neighborhoods who are affected by violence? What do they want from the state?
So it's so fascinating to me to hear what Amanda is articulating, because it reflects some research that I have done with Vesla Weaver and Gwen Prowse in a project we call the Portals Policing Project. And if you are watching this, you can Google portalspolicingproject.org, and you can see the site. And what we did was we actually took another Yale Law student's art project. His name is Amar Bakshi, from an organization called Shared Studios, where he took large golden shipping containers, the things you see, the train, the big shipping container on a chain, painted them gold, added tech that enabled people to have conversations with other folks hundreds, thousands of miles away. And we connected people in Los Angeles, Newark, Chicago, Milwaukee, Baltimore, and Mexico City to have conversations about their experiences with violence in their neighborhood and also police. And we recorded over 800 conversations like this. And, a couple of themes came out from those conversations that reflect what Amanda was just discussing. First of all, just an unrelenting distrust of the policing service as it exists right now. I've actually written a paper where people kept coming back to this idea to protect and serve, and saying, well, the police don't actually protect and serve. That's what they say they're supposed to do, but they don't actually do it. And then instead of simply saying things like, we're just going to take care of this ourselves. And there was a little bit of that. They started having very deep articulations of what it is they wanted from government. And it wasn't just about a change in the policing service as it exists now, although there was some of that, but a lot of it echoed what Amanda was talking about, a conception of safety that centers basic public goods of what I would call citizenship, safe housing, good healthcare, schools that work. In the context of the COVID pandemic, clean water. Clean water is necessary when you have to wash your hands multiple times a day. But imagine being in Flint, Michigan, where you can't trust the water, and then you have to rely perhaps on donations of bottled water to wash your hands regularly. That cannot be the conception of public safety that the state provides each and every citizen. Is not what citizens deserve. So, I think our research actually reflects a lot of what Amanda is discussing. And what I find incredibly heartening about this is that if we just do some deep listening across the country, in the context of this conversation about where to go next, we can rely on the people to actually articulate their needs. They might not be able to necessarily articulate what the form of the delivery of that service should be, although I'm impressed by these kids. I want to go to that mental health spa. That sounds pretty good to me. That might be the job of lawyers and others, in our own law school to, figure out how to serve, deliver what they say is necessary. But to me, this is the essence, right, of what democracy is about. Letting the citizens actually articulate the goals and projects for the society they want to live in.
I have to say, I love that project in part because at this great humanities center, you managed to take a public art project and turn it into a social science lab, which is just remarkable. Phil, I wonder if you could jump in, because I know you've been thinking a lot about sort of what's possible at a moment like this and how we should think about the future.
Yeah, and I think we're all just going to be piggybacking off of each other for the rest of this because there's so much overlap here. I want to piggyback on both what Amanda and Tracey said, and I want to not shy away from a thing because I know that, Amanda, I'm less familiar with you personally, but I've been following your work, and I know that Tracey, you and I go into these rooms a lot, where what we end up doing is we translate from folks in vulnerable spaces to the people who have access to resources to make those spaces less vulnerable. And what both Amanda and Tracey just said is when you listen to communities, here's what they come up with. And it is often framed as if, and what a fresh perspective, and what deep, and I just have to name, if we were listening to the people who were vulnerable in the first place, we wouldn't have gotten ourselves in this mess. That there is in fact some violence that was necessary for those perspectives to seem fresh. And I feel like it needs to be, in so many spaces, I almost as a habit end up papering over that because it makes it easier for people to hear. But I feel like it's now time, at the very least, it's likely past time, to name all the ways in which we haven't been listening and they've been talking sense when our policies have made no sense whatsoever. So the kind of thing that's possible now, it's the kind of thing that would have always been possible if, and I hate to invoke the Black grandmother, but I will invoke the Black grandmother in this. When I was going to college, she's like, now with all of that stuff that you're doing in college, remember, you're never going to prove, you're never going to discover nothing. What you'll be able to do is prove things I told you. And she was dead on accurate. As a social scientist, I don't discover things so much as I disallow certain discourses and I get evidence for the things that I was taught. So I take, for example, we have a new narrative coming out of the city of Ithaca, right? The city that houses Cornell, where the mayor came in, I guess it was late June, early July, and said, my community is ready to start from scratch. We're not quite at the original position, right? But we're like 3 steps away from the original position. Think about, well, how are we going to make a society where public safety is put together? My community is ready. What can we do? And so since July, my team has been on the ground in Ithaca to the degree that you can through Zoom. We've been on the Zoom in Ithaca, but we've been talking with community folks. We've been talking with local electeds, talking with local business leaders, not just in the city, but then in the county. Because Ithaca, like every other city, every county in New York, has to have a public safety plan to go to the governor, which was all a reaction to the public uprising in response to the public lynching of George Floyd. And there, what became obvious early, not just from the community and not just to the electeds, but to law enforcement, was we have built a beast to respond to the places where we've taken funding away. And if we gave the funding to the communities in the first place, then we would not need for this beast to get fed this way. And so the plan that was unveiled just last week was to literally abolish the department and create in its place a department of community solutions and public safety, where the majority of employees would be non-sworn, unarmed responders to community in crisis. And it follows from what sort of 4 principles we've derived at CPE to do our work, which seems, again, such common sense, and they have been in these communities for a long time. The first is, quite simply, white supremacy is bad. And what that means is that if there are systems that prop up white supremacy, we should be invested in dismantling them. The second is that by the time you've gotten to a 911 call, to calling for crisis, that's a policy failure. Right? No housing expert, no real estate agent has ever closed the deal and said, and you know what's the best thing about this home or this apartment is you get to call 911 more often. Right? That doesn't make any sense. We know that we're all safer when we have the resources to avoid that call in the first place. The third principle is that when someone is in crisis, the public responsibility should be to send the appropriate resources, which means if my crisis is homelessness, why are you sending a badge and a gun? Why are you not sending a roof and 4 walls? If my crisis is mental health, again, badge and gun does not translate into better mental health. No mental health specialist, no therapist, no clinician has ever said, what you really need is a badge and a gun in this room. That's never happened. And yet we have our public systems designed to respond as if you might be a threat, and the thing I can do right now is I can punish you. As if the set of choices we gave folks wasn't the obscenity, as opposed to the choices they made within that terrible system. And the fourth one, which is the hardest one in this moment and in general, but the one that is most, I think, important for those who are in positions where our proximity to power is sometimes greater than our proximity to the problem. And that's the things we do to change the systems that we've got should not impede the creation of the systems that we need. A sort of more straightforward way to say that, it's fine to be engaged in harm reduction over the systems we've got, in reform of the systems we've got, because there are still bodies dropping. So it's fine to try and change the things we've got in response to the most vulnerable. But we should be thinking about a world where our systems are set up not just to provide justice, to provide freedom. So that instead of saying we're going to just punish the people with the terrible set of options we gave them, we're going to give people better options. And sometimes the ways that we approach the systems we've got get in the way. Those 4 things, which we heard from the folks in Ithaca, when you put that in place, sometimes it ends up like what's happening in Long Island, where we have a group of folks who are engaging in reform, some of the best, off the shelf and some innovative stuff, but doesn't look like abolition at all. And sometimes it looks like what's happening in Ithaca, where the communities have said, you work for us, and if you're not willing to go this route, if you're willing to sue, we're willing to go to more radical ends. That's what's possible. I think before this summer, a lot of folks were constrained, myself included, CPE for sure included, by what we imagined was politically feasible. And now we're constrained by what we can imagine, which is why we're engaged in such vigorous reimagining. But that's, I think, where we should be starting. When you listen to the communities who are affected, you will hear things that feel revelatory, and that should indicate that there's been a problem in what you've been listening to.
Thank you. That was beautiful. May I just, I just want to turn to, I'm dying to ask Tracey about her grandmother, but I want to just turn to Elizabeth first, because, because one of the things about, if you've seen all the work that's been coming out of the Justice Collaboratory, which very much resonates with a lot of what Phil just said, and then reading just the ridiculously stupid headlines about the debate over defunding the police and things. And I know you spend a lot of time serving as a translator, just as Phil said. So as you've been living this for the last number of years, how do you think about these questions and the role that you play as a translator in your own community?
Well, I think it's really well put, Phil. Thank you for that. really think you're putting this emphasis on, these are questions of budgets and resources and questions of power. And the thing is, like, yes, calls to defund the police reached national headlines last summer, but that was a result of years and years of organizing. The Movement for Black Lives was founded in 2013, but long before that, back into the 90s, and long before, you had organizations like Critical Resistance, saying these things, that it's about divesting from policing and incarceration and investing in the things that actually keep communities safe. And it's beautiful that there's more traction for that. I think it is worth highlighting the fact that the defund police protests have been incredibly impactful. So in the last 10 months alone, you've had over $840 million divested from police forces in over 20 different cities, and $160 million invested into communities. And there's a beautiful new website, defundpolice.org, that highlights, what people are doing in these different cities, what those strategies have looked like. But people are really very clear that all of the kind of piecemeal reforms that have been on offer, since 2013, all that they have done when we've invested in new technology like body cameras or more implicit bias training, the result of this is that money goes right back to feeding the beast. There's much more money now in police department budgets, when people have been saying all along, as Phil said, that what we need are excellent schools. What we need is access to healthcare, mental health supports. And so it's beautiful to see that it's organizers that have built the power to shift the conversation and to shift resources as well, because these are fundamentally questions of public budgets. And so, yes, as much as we are doing the work of imagination and trying to get people to, talk about what they need, it's also about those fights and building power to get that money shifted.
Thank you. So Tracey, I actually do want to ask you about your grandmother, because I know she looms large in your life's work. And what if you could talk a little bit about how you think about the relationship between the past and present, and also just, if I could just steer a little bit, how you think about the role of understanding trauma and the way that it should inform our conversation about policing and safety.
Yeah, it's funny. I've never heard your grandmother's story, Phil. I'm sitting in my office at home. You can see this clock over my shoulder. It's a clock that was actually my grandfather's, not my grandmother's. His own grandfather bought that clock. It was the first thing he purchased after he was emancipated from slavery. And I got this clock because I was the firstborn grandchild, and it's here as a reminder of my family's legacy. My grandmother was a civil rights activist, and she was born in Selma, Alabama, as was my own mother. And, my grandmother used to always tell me when I was a kid that my life was not my own, and that my job was to do work to make life better for my people, is basically the way she put it. And she said, that's what you're going to do. And I said, yes, Grandma. And, so that's the version of my grandmother's story, that, everything I do, I'm sort of checking in and making sure that I'm still trying to make her proud, even though she's now been gone for 13 years. And, when I think about the present and the past, I'm really mindful of Phil's point, echoed by Amanda, that these are calls that have been made for a while, but a long while, right? So, I spent a lot of time in doing a project about 6 years ago, reading the Kerner Commission report. I'm reading Black Metropolis, reading W.E.B. Du Bois, all the way back to W.E.B. Du Bois' work on Black Reconstruction. And so one way to understand this moment as we think about abolition is that the abolition project is really a project of reconstruction and has always been. And that is the way I try to think about it in terms of my own work, that tries to lean on the social psychology of legitimacy, but also political science and the importance of law. Literally how we think about citizenship and who has been denied citizenship, and the importance of providing certain public goods to everyone equally, that have not been able to obtain them since Reconstruction was cut short through white terrorism, right? So that's the past and present story. And I think thinking about that, thinking about the reconstructions that we have lived through in this country is relevant to the trauma question, Heather, really, because I think we're often focused on the particular traumas of particular incidents, appropriately so. Phil just discussed the very public and horrific lynching of George Floyd. We also know historically that those kinds of incidents have a long history. And so that the trauma that we have to deal with as we move forward in trying to construct a vital community and a just society depends on contending with historical and collective trauma, as well as the many, many individual incidents that so many people are describing, circulating, populating, that we see in social media. And it makes it really hard to do this work sometimes. And this is the last thing I'll say, going back to, this reform, transform. I mean, when you're trying to get something done now, you just want to make things stop. And there are some things that we know we can do to make things stop. And it seems irresponsible not to try to do some of that. And you always, while you're doing that, as Phil said, have to be conscious about the long game and the worry about not always being able to tell the ways in which some things you can do right now to make things stop. Sometimes you just can't be sure about how it's going to affect the long game. And that's when I check in with my grandmother and just say, give me strength, give me guidance, I'm jumping in. And I'm calling on my friends. So Phil and Amanda, please stay in here with me.
I guess a question of all of you, which is, so Tracey and Phil, your work is relentlessly data driven. I sometimes think of Tracey as the Spock of policing reform. That's always sort of the inquiry. What does the data say? Go where the experiments lead. And I mean, I know also being a lawyer, right? There's always this deep challenge, which is to distance yourself enough so that you can move forward and do what your client needs and tell your client's story. On the other hand, being connected enough to your client's story. And you are all working on things that aren't just tough, but they directly affect you, your families, your community. I just wonder how you put these two roles together, being a human being and a scholar, being a human being and a lawyer. I just wonder how you do it. And I'm going to cold call because I can see that's a hard question. So I'm going to start with Phil. Law professors cold call Phil. So sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. My dad was a professor of philosophy, so there was no safe haven in the home. I understand the ways in which those things have separate roles and they can feel segregated, but the work of integrating them isn't difficult for me. They start integrated. If someone were to ask sort of how I came about doing this work, one version of it is that this was the uncomfortable space of adolescence for me. That I experienced, I witnessed racism, but the targeted forms that I got in high school looked really different. I had to have people explain to me that that's what it was. I had a high school English teacher who was beloved by my white friends or my white peers, and he's so incredibly nasty, and I just had not experienced that before. And then a Black teacher used to teach the same class, and I'm so glad this is happening to you. I said, why? That seems so mean. He says, no. He does this to every Black student in his class, and you're too smart to be crushed by it. You'll be able to withstand it. Maybe something can happen. What that did to me was it put me in front of the mirror, like you do when someone's really passive aggressive to you and you didn't say quite the right thing. So you're practicing what you wish you had said. It did that to me, but instead of like with a teacher, with racism in America, the way that it was happening now, not the way it had been taught to me. And I realized that the stories that I needed to tell about how racism was functioning were going to require an expansion of my repertoire as a storyteller, including synthetic analysis from social theory and analysis from quantitative. So all I'm doing is telling the most responsible story I know how to tell about the way the world is, to help people find expression for the things they feel but can't say. And that I take that back in and try and make policy out of those experiences. That's a unified and unifying project that just feels like it has parts that don't come together often. And so when I get credit for being someone who spans across these different things, I'm like, no. You just gave me access, and I was stupid enough to think that this mission was worthy of all the tools that you gave me. But if we actually had inclusive spaces at the elite level, this is what women would be doing, what trans folks and what queer folks would be doing, and definitely what Black folks would have been doing for ages. So this integration of trying to keep hope in the middle of this, trying to advocate passionately without losing sight of where the data takes us, which are often unexpected places, that's just me as an honest storyteller, right? Trying to figure out how to tell an honest story about heartbreaking things happening to people who are way more vulnerable than I ever was. And I think, I won't speak for Amanda and Tracey because they can speak much better than can I. But I think that this is the kind of thing that my career and the work that I produce that I'm most proud of, it comes out of just that, a unifying desire to tell more honest stories about our experiences and to then demand a world that is responsive to those as if they weren't just the truth, but as if that truth mattered.
Tracey, I see you nodding.
I'm just so happy Phil is here at Yale. I don't really have much to add to that except to say that, when you say, how do you integrate your life with that? So much of my life is my work, for better or for worse. My partner understands that. My children understand that. It's not always easy for them. But one thing that has been incredibly important to me is to create space for a community of scholars to be able to tell those stories. And that's been the essence of what the Justice Collaboratory is. And I'm proud to have played a role in having, encouraging Phillip Atiba Goff to come, and Elizabeth Hinton and Monica Bell, and the co-founder of the Collaboratory, Tom Tyler. Actually, I think I even gave a couple of calls to Jennifer Richardson. I mean, we have an amazing group of people here working together. And for me, weaving together the scholarly life and the personal is one of the things that makes life that makes life worth living and makes all this work possible. I'll say one other thing, and that is, you also have an opportunity to do some outside work, and one of those has been participating in the Square One project, which is what allowed me to connect again with Amanda and have a close-up look at some of the things that she's done over the last decade, which are incredible. But those are the things, Heather, really that give me life. as my daughter would say.
Amanda?
Yeah, so it's funny you ask. I actually did a lot of deep reflection about this recently. A friend of mine last summer, we were at a rally here in Detroit where young people were calling for police-free schools. And we were leaving the rally and she turned to me, and we were there with her 2-year-old daughter, who is my little niece. And she said, you know, in the face of all of this, all of the trauma and misery and everything that we're up against, how do you do this work with a sense of joy? How do you stay connected with your purpose? And in the moment, I gave her a throwaway answer, you know, but I promised that I would give it some more thought. And I ended up writing a letter to my niece, and it came out in the Boston Globe a couple of weeks ago. And it's all about the many practices that are second nature to me now, but that keep me centered in my purpose. And a few of those are, you know, I think it's really important that even as we are fighting for freedom, that we practice our freedom. And so one concrete practice I have is every week I take a tech Sabbath, and I start the day by writing out a list of today I want, and I listen to my gut. And, you know, it's today I want to garden. Today I want to hear my friend's voice. Today I want to walk through tall trees. And what that does is it keeps me in touch with my intuition and what I want and what I feel like when I'm free. And it makes me very attuned to when I'm actually listening to my gut and when I'm imposing someone else's will for my own. And so staying in that type of practice, you know, is something that I wanted to impart to my niece. Another thing I do is I keep a mentor of mine, Vince Warren. He had this advice. He's this director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. And he asked a question at the Law for Black Lives kickoff conference several years ago. He said, 5 generations from now, what will Black people thank us for? And it is such a big, beautiful question that keeps me focused on thinking beyond this election cycle, beyond the 18-month grant cycle, to really deep into the future. What can I be doing today that will create more possibilities for my descendants? And I think, you know, in terms of this question of past and present, it also makes me grateful for the people 5 generations ago who were laser focused on getting free and were not going to settle for less. You know, the people who were not interested in reforming slavery or reforming, you know, convict leasing, but instead were deeply focused on Black freedom and liberation and creating the conditions for everybody to thrive. And so I think it's, you know, about staying connected to what are the bigger questions, what is the work that will reverberate across generations. And that helps me, I think, you know, in the day-to-day, it keeps me from getting too drawn into Twitter battles, you know, and trying to be the wittiest person, you know, on social media, and really focused on what can I be doing to build institutions that will carry large numbers of people forward. So those are a couple of things that keep me grounded.
Thank you. So Phil, I wonder if I could turn back to something that you raised, which is you said that, you know, in years prior, you felt constrained by the existing political moment in thinking about what is next, and that now you're feeling freer, that there's more possibility at this moment. I think that's what you said. And I just wanted to ask you, I don't know how anyone who can encounter a single one of you or your work and not feel the urgent need to push forward and help. And I wonder, where do you think the next steps are, and what do you sort of see on the sort of near-term horizon?
So on the near term, I can say that this process of giving people the resources so they don't have to be in crisis, that's not going anywhere. That's now centered within sort of the long liberation struggle for Black folks in the United States, and the ways in which that permeates the liberation struggles for all people across the globe. In the longer term, I'm happy to be in a space to say that I don't know, and to say that I'm going to see it more reflected in the eyes of my students than I'm going to see it within my own vision. You know, we've been talking about the different spots of, you know, we want to do this and not that. Like these are the ways and these are the things that get us hung up. You know, but I'm teaching a course right now on how you make the determination that something is racist. Right? Like I feel like it's a course that I should have gotten when I was an undergraduate or in graduate school, or I should have encountered somebody else doing. So I guess since I haven't encountered it, I'll teach it. But in that, I had cause to look at this long trajectory. And the ways in which now I see students rightly pushing back against the idea that they should have to be the right kind of victim, that they should have to have a respectable life in order for their full dignity and humanity to be recognized. And it is appropriately, they're pushing against what Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham first coined as the politics of respectability. But I hope that in those moments that they're not inadvertently kicking dirt on John Lewis's or Rosa Parks' name. Because the birthplace of politics of respectability was to be doing combat with a certain manifestation of racism in their lives. And the politics of respectability, when they put it on, won so many battles. And I don't know that all of those, so when I go through the archives and I've talked to my historian friends, I don't know that they could glimpse the ways in which, this is kind of what Tracey was saying, the ways in which what they were doing right then was not going to be responsive to the world they gave birth to once they won. I am happy to say that I have made it to an age that I didn't think I might make it to when I was younger. And so I can't glimpse the next part of the horizon because there's already a generation dreaming of different things than I could imagine. What I will say is that at each stage, the enemy transforms, it evolves, and so our tactics do. And my hope is that whatever is possible in the long term is that we see the true face of the enemy and we do combat against it. Because in the moments before that, in all the periods before that, there are always debates about whether or not the enemy is white supremacy or a current set of tactics on offer. And it makes me sad when we fight about the tactics more than we fight the enemy. But I don't know what it'll look like. I just know that it will be as revelatory to me to start to see it as I imagine it was for my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, to imagine that, you know what, it's perfect. I can dress however I want. My family can look however it wants, right? The structures of our society can look radically different from this, because my hope is that by the time that we're done with the work that I get to do while I'm on this earth, that we will have lifted some obstacles from out of the way. And in the same way that when I was getting out of graduate school, the last thing I said to my advisor while I was still a graduate student was, you made choices I could never have made. You endured things I could never have done. And I think sometimes I think less of you for a life that is structured by those choices. But I hope that you understand the deep respect I have, because I couldn't have made possible the world you made possible for me. I hope that the work that I put in and the work that my cohort puts in is worthy of the feelings that I have for the mentors and the folks who came before me.
Tracey, I don't know how you want to answer this question, because you both spend your time dreaming.
I actually have to say something after that.
I know. You spend your time dreaming of the future too, but also I know you also spend a lot of time thinking like a lawyer, right? Thinking about the concrete, what can we do at the institutional level for all the things that are blocking the change that Phil's and the next generation are dreaming of. What do you think we should be focused on at this moment?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that while Phil was talking, when he said, well, in the near term, and there's one near-term project that I have been really focused on that that's a very lawyerly project, actually, that I think many people have overlooked, and that is the role of state governments to actually shape and constrain and limit policing agencies in particular, but you could also talk about it as prosecutors. I'm just focused on police right now, at the municipal level. It's kind of odd and strange, actually, that policing agencies that have so much power have so little formal legal authorization and therefore so little constraint. And so here's what I mean. Obviously, police officers are in most cases empowered to, quote, enforce the laws. And those laws are promulgated by legislatures collectively, whether we're talking about the municipal or the state level. In some cases, some cities even have charters that say there shall be police and they shall enforce the laws. And that's pretty much all they say. Many of these charters are from the 1800s. Contrast that to, let's say, a state Department of Labor, which if you look in any state's set of statutes, there will be a chapter devoted to the Department of Labor that actually authorizes this agency's existence, will articulate its mission, will articulate what it can do, will have all sorts of constraints about what it can't do, things like that. The fact that we don't have that kind of structure for this particular institution that has so much power over people's lives, including deadly power, I think is completely strange, odd, completely inconsistent with the rule of law. And it's a project that the Justice Collaboratory has a clinic now that we're devoted to addressing that, trying to come up with a set of legislative arrangements, model legislation at the state level that can be used across the country. The second piece of that, though, is another particularly legal project, which is to say that you have to do this at the state level because of the way federalism works in this country. And that's a deep, important question that every law school should be working on, but especially elite law schools. And we have for a long time, but we haven't actually, conceptualized it in the terms of what I'm talking about. It's relevant to all sorts of things in the news today, the existence of the filibuster and so on. And so, that's an important near-term project for me that isn't really at the forefront of how people are thinking about this problem as they talk about reform, transform, abolition, so on, and that's what I was mentioning earlier when I was suggesting that even when you listen necessarily to communities about how they're going to articulate what they need for safety, inevitably there is a legal project about how that's going to be delivered. And it's not necessarily the granular legal project of, the city's budget or so on, but it's a bigger, grander structural project of how democratic governance goes on in this country. That to me, I think is a near-term project that we are not going to get rid of, that I'm centrally interested in and devoted to. How it's going to turn out, I don't know, I so hope for my children that this will be a better place. Hard to be hopeful sometimes, but that's when I start thinking about my grandmother, because she was an eternal optimist. And again, invoking what Phil was talking about in terms of our ancestors and the kinds of things they lived through for no reason, really. I don't know where she got it from. She would say her deep faith. And I wish that for myself sometimes, that I had the faith that she had throughout her entire life.
Thank you. Amanda, I wonder what you're thinking about at this moment.
Yeah, Tracey, in terms of the way that you're thinking about, the role of law right now, and thinking really creatively about that. And I know, Heather, you had asked kind of what it means to show up as a lawyer in this moment. And I think that has been a big part of our practice and a way of kind of getting lawyers to think very differently about our role and the ways in which we are often trained to, particularly when it comes to social movement organizers, to dull radical energy, or to say, this is what's winnable. These are the 4 different ways that you could get arrested, if you do that, so maybe you shouldn't do it. And so I think that for us, it's really been challenging ourselves to do what we call holding our clients' freedom dreams as sacred, and doing that deep listening to what those dreams are, and then doing what we can do to translate them into reality. So one example, one of my favorite clients at DJC is a community organization on the west side of the city that quietly bought up 14 homes around their community center when it was really affordable to do so. And they came to us because they said, we've heard about these things called community land trust. We want some kind of legal entity that will help this neighborhood stay affordable for generations. And we want to put community solar over the entire neighborhood. And we want to turn one of the houses into transitional housing for men coming back from prison. And we want to start a neighborhood cooperative business corridor. And so that, to us, like, that is a freedom dream. Like, that is the power of community. And it's way more brilliant than I think a group of lawyers could come up with on our own. You know, this is combining neighborhood affordability, climate justice, reentry housing, all in one really elegant solution. And so it's really taken some retraining. You know, I took that back to our staff attorney and said, figure this out. Like, I know that this is not a problem that you've had to face, you know, coming out of business and transactional law, but figure it out. And so I think that's the type of energy and the type of kind of reimagining the role of ourselves as professionals and as lawyers, and really having these freedom dreams come first, and not always making this first move that we're trained to as lawyers in terms of how do we shoehorn that into a claim about due process or equal protection. Like, no more of the shoehorning. Let's just listen and honor these dreams and help translate them.
So I am so grateful to all of you. I know you've been having this conversation for a long time, but to jump in for a moment and let this audience listen to a sliver of it. I know that I am not the only one who wishes that we could spend hours and hours more doing it, but I'm supposed to draw this to a close. So I just want to close by saying that you all embody the best values that a university or a law school or the legal institution could aspire to. And I just really appreciate everything that you have done to inspire us all to do better and reach higher. And I just want to say thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we are all in your debt.
Thank you. This has been a real joy. Thank you.